would you say to those companies that don't realize they're positioning themselves as a commodity?
I think it depends on what you want. And I'd imagine this is a lot of the work or part of the work that you help your clients with, Mandy, where, there's so many different ways to have success in business or find success in business. And there are many different definitions of successful. I think it's a very personal thing. And, if you want to just be in this like slugfest with competitors and kind of fighting for scraps, and that's fine, then a commodity offering is fine. There's no reason to change that. But I assume most people hear that and like, well, I don't want that. And in that case, then sure, you need to have a strategy in place to not be positioned as a commodity, so that you can command higher prices, so that you can create the margins that you want, so that you can hire more senior staff, so you're not dealing with as much bullshit, so that you can have a more relaxing lifestyle with a business that starts to run itself.
All right, we are live on LinkedIn. Today on the show, I have Eli Rubel. Eli, welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eli, his background is in finance and strategic finance, bookkeeping, and accounting for agencies and other service-based firms. And Eli, why don't you share a little bit more about your background and what brought you to this place and where you are today?
Sure, happy to. So, my background, I have a non-traditional background. I'm a longtime agency founder. I currently own 3 agencies and run one of them. I have a marketing agency called Mattermade, where we grew that business to $7 million in net profit in the first 3 years of operation. To date, that business has done a little over 9 million in net profit. I also have a design agency called No Boring Design, and that business has done a little over 1 million in net profit since I started 2 years ago. And then I just recently took all of my passion for agency profitability and started Profit Labs, where we act as a virtual finance department. So CFO, controller, ARAP, bookkeeping, all under one roof for less than the cost of a full-time employee.
Wow.
That's what I'm doing today.
Well, I definitely want to dig into this and how what you're seeing drives, $7 million of annual profits in an agency, because there's a lot of companies right now in the agency side who are seeing profits shrink. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. And, one of the things that when we were sharing about this event is the idea that CEOs don't earn salaries. They actually create them. They fund them. And really that salary feels smaller and smaller, that the harder that they work. And the company really needs to be about driving growth. So our topic today is the 3 hidden killers that are quietly draining firms' profits. And I would love to hear, what is it that's driving the $7 million per year of net profit in this agency?
Yeah, and I should clarify, it's not 7 per year. It was 7 million in the first 3 years.
Okay,
our
still
peak,
pretty impressive.
Yeah, our peak we did 4.2 million in EBITDA in a single year, but that was a unique unicorn of a year for us.
Okay.
So back to your question, which was what's driving that profit?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. What's driving that profit?
Yeah. So and this is something I've heard you talk about, Mandy, and I completely agree with, which is pricing is probably one of the most important things that agencies can do to create outsized returns and profit beyond what their peers are seeing. The story I like to tell with Mattermade, the marketing agency, was when I first launched that business, we were charging, or I should be more specific, solo founder at the time, was charging $2,500 per month for advisory services, marketing advisory services. Very quickly, I realized I'm not a marketer. I'm a business owner. I'm not a marketer. And so I hired someone else and was like, okay, let's see if we can charge for this other person's services instead of my time, and raised our prices to, I think it was like $7,500. And we were able to get that, and we got to capacity. And this is what I call price sensitivity testing. So essentially, agencies have this natural cycle where they ramp up to capacity, they're at capacity, and then as long as they can keep demand going, they go through this kind of manic hiring sprint where they're trying to create more capacity by hiring more team members. Every time we'd reach capacity, I see that as an opportunity to price sensitivity test. And what do I mean by that? So you reach capacity or you're nearing capacity. That's when I change my prices. And usually I'll do this. The litmus test I like to use is I want to change my prices to a number that makes me feel really uncomfortable, like a number that would make me laugh if I said it out loud, because it seems unreasonable for somebody to spend that much money on the same services, not changing the services at all. And it's a perfect time to do those tests when you're reaching capacity, because you really don't want to close business in that moment where you're at capacity. You kind of need to buy yourself time anyway. And so if you lose some deals or slow down your close rate because you increase your price, it's actually not the worst thing. And it's the best time, I think, to test for price elasticity. So we ended up, long story short, we ended up taking our prices from that initial 2,500 per month to a peak of 45,000 per month over the course of, took about 2 years to get there. And then our average retainer was right in that $40,000 to $45,000 per month range. The thing that I think is important to mention there is that our services didn't change a whole ton between that, call it first year, we were somewhere around that 7.5, 10K per month. The sprint up to the 40, 45K per month, the services didn't change a whole lot. It was really just our positioning, our confidence around pricing, and the storytelling that we were able to present to prospective clients, showing them the outcomes that we delivered for prior clients.
So then that's important then, because you're actually delivering outsized returns and results. So then what happened then between when you were charging $2,500 a month and $45,000 per month as far as outcomes? Like what kind of outcomes were you delivering?
Yeah. So I think we started to get at bats. Like when I first started the business, I shook my network. I had some good VC connections. So I was able to get into some smaller deals, some smaller startups. And we were targeting B2B startups at the time.
Okay.
And, we were working with seed stage in the beginning, and then eventually started working with Series A and Series B. And then you get your first shot at a Series C company, or maybe like a pre-IPO company. And so over the course of that first year, we just started laddering our way up in credibility. When you close those first couple of deals, you have to use them as your source of credibility, but eventually you can get something that's a little shinier. And so for us, our big unlock was we closed Dropbox as a client. We closed Loom as a client, Hopin, Product Board, CallRail. Like we closed some really notable Yelp, really notable businesses. And for some of them, we were really instrumental in their growth. For example, Loom, we were the very first, we created their demand gen department. We were brought in by the CEO directly. They had one marketing employee at the time, and we created their first demand gen program. And then eventually our whole value prop was like, we come in, we set up your program, and eventually we make ourselves obsolete. You hire a team and we go our merry way. And so being able to charge those prices was really directly the result of being able to point and say, this is what we just did. This is what we just did. And I even made part of my sales pitch, and I miss these days. This is the best sales pitch I've ever had. I would say, listen, I know you're talking to us. I know you're talking to competitor 1, competitor 2. We're almost always guaranteed to be in a bake-off with like the same 2 or 3 folks. Mm-hmm. I can guarantee you our prices are going to be $10,000 to $15,000 per month higher than our nearest competitor. Guaranteed. Our services, they're the same. We do the same things. We're going to use the same words when we talk about what we do. The difference is these outcomes and these logos and these results that we've driven. That's the only reason why you would pay us that much more. And it's up to you if you want to go with us or go with them. It's a question of, do you want to save money and hope for the best, or do you want to go with the kind of chosen or the validated path? Mm. And that was how we kind of built clout over time.
Right. So then the real question then is that how do you become known as that validated path? Like, how do you get on that pathway? And I'd love to unpack that with you.
Yeah.
and hear your perspective on, because I mean, you hired a marketer, right? How did you
Yeah.
know that marketer would be good enough that you could actually have them be delivering $45,000 a month services? Or was it a
Yeah.
different person? Was it a different
It,
person?
yeah. So it ended up being a different person. So I originally partnered with someone that I'd always admired as a marketer. So my first company was a software business, SaaS, back in 2010. We raised VC money from a top tier Silicon Valley VC. So I had a decent network there in that space. He was a marketer for another portfolio company. And we got to know each other through the VC portfolio community. Looked up to the work that he did. I thought he was just like very brass tacks, great at executing. So when I started this agency and realized I didn't want to do the work myself, I reached out to him and was like, hey, do you want to do some part-time work and just see if this is interesting for you and interesting for me? And so that was when we were, again, starting at that 2,500 and starting to ratchet our prices up as we went. I think he stayed on board until our prices were somewhere around the 20, maybe 25K per month. And eventually the business just outgrew what he wanted to be doing. And so I ended up bringing in more leaders. And at the time when we brought in replacement leaders, that was when I had to level up. It's not even that the talent I brought in was better than that first person. It's just different, right? Like if you're pitching for larger accounts, you're likely working with more seasoned leaders. They're going to expect a certain level of communication, a certain style of communication, and you need someone who's been there, done that to confidently handle those client stakeholders. And so I ended up, poaching folks who had been at larger businesses and had larger outcomes already that they could reference to maintain the credibility and clout that I would pitch in our sales process.
Right. And so when you're looking at this, when you're charging $20,000 to $40,000 a month for effectively the same work as you did when at $2,500 a month, you can really afford to hire whatever staff you want.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big mindset shift that a lot of agencies could really value from having, because a lot of times they're looking at from their own constraints right now with not having enough business, with not having the right kind of business. And instead what you did is you stair-stepped your way up to it, but effectively it took you stepping into a vision and then working backwards.
Yep. 100%.
Before all the pieces were in place. And I mean, was there a decision that you made at one point where you were like, I'm going to become the very best. Like, we're going to become the best. We're going to be known for these outcomes. Was there a moment where you decided that, or did it just kind of happen?
That was the aspiration. I think that that's something that most agencies would probably say to themselves, like, we're going to be the best at this thing, because it's easy to say to yourself. But I wanted us to be known as the tip of the spear in B2B tech marketing. And I had that as one aspiration. The other aspiration was I had reverse sent, to your point, you mentioned this a second ago. I always start every agency with a profit model first. So I don't build an agency and then kind of like stumble into success and hope that things work. I reverse engineer, like, how much profit do I want this business to produce for me, and how much time do I want to be putting into this business? And then based on all of that, architect what type of team do I need? How much can I pay them? Based on that, what does our pricing need to be in order to maintain the margins that we're looking for? And so I think my approach is typically backwards from how many agency owners end up with a model ultimately. And it's a lot easier to produce the metrics and the results that you're after if you start that way than,
Right.
just going for it, hoping for the best, and then trying to unwind certain things or change certain things down the road.
Well, and that's an interesting approach too. When you're thinking, from the numbers, you're building out the numbers, and this is what we do with our clients as well within our Invisible Advantage program. Is we actually map out those numbers and say, back of the neck, and maybe not as extensively you're doing, and you're putting together a whole financial system in their business, right? That kind of goes outside of the scope of that. But when you're actually looking at, well, in order to be able to reach, let's say, $1 million in profits, let's say that's the goal of the $1 million of profits. We could get there with 50 clients, or we could get there with 10 clients, or we could get there with 20. Like, when you start looking at those numbers and like the calculation pops it out, all of a sudden they're like, well, which is a lot easier? Which is easier to go and sell, 50 to 100 clients, or is it easier to sell 20? And of course, it's a lot easier to sell and to service 20. And there's such a mindset around, well, we just need to build more capacity. We need to hire more people. And I think you called that out too. That the way you're saying that capacity, you call the price sensitivity test with that price, that the capacity. And I think that's changing though. The market is changing there because like business is I think the agencies are getting pretty tired of that old grow by adding more headcount, and they're realizing how stressful that is. So that there's a reckoning that's happening in the market that I'm noticing. Have you been seeing that too?
To some extent, I'm curious, what are you seeing people replace that with? Are they just choosing to stay small?
Well, the big thing is like wanting to be lean. I'm hearing a lot less conversations about, well, I want to grow to 20 people. Like they're like, I don't want to grow to 20 people. And I would say the majority of people are saying, I want to be able to grow the company. But every now and then you'll hear someone say, I want to be able to grow like 50 people. And I'm like, this is not the metrics we want to be managing to, right?
Yeah.
Because we can grow to 50 people doesn't necessarily mean the company's going to be profitable. And then there's a lot of other very wise companies that say, I am not interested in growing this big, huge company. I want to keep it lean. I want to keep it tight. I want to keep it profitable. And what I'm seeing is agencies are a lot more interested in that now than ever before. And I think that it's a very good thing that's happening.
Yeah. And there are pros and cons to everything, right? Like you mentioned, you get to $1 million in profit through 10 clients or through 50 clients. And the pro to 10 clients, as you mentioned, is just a lot fewer clients to manage, fewer employees to manage them. It's much more simple operation. The downside to that is you feel every single churn is like an existential shaking of the business, right, where you suddenly are like horrible pit in your stomach and staying up trying to figure out how to replace them. So that's the con of
right.
Balance the pro. And then the flip side is true for 50 clients. Like you could have 5 clients leave and you're like, we better fix that. Let's learn from that. But it's not a existential threat.
Right. And well, one of the things that I see oftentimes too, I mean, and 10 is probably not even the best number because it's example of like whale clients that you lose one and it's pretty detrimental. But it's very, very oftentimes though, to be able to get to a million, it's looking at like, we need to have 150 clients. Like that's what it takes to get to $1 million of net when you're looking at the price points and the way that they're running their business model there. And it's finding that happy medium that a mindset shift is forced at that point.
Totally. Yeah.
The other thing I've noticed too, and maybe you've seen this as well, is that once you've optimized your business to really being able to have it be lean and to be very profitable, all of a sudden you see that it's actually not that difficult to scale it. Because the hardest thing that made it scalable was that all the crap that you were doing before that wasn't unscalable. And now that you have this model in place that has some amount of scale, it's like, okay, we can keep on growing this. And it naturally happens because you've put in place all of the right systems to be able to deliver at a high level of quality. You've put in the systems to be able to drive consistent amount of lead flow and to nurture and convert that lead flow into sales. And once you have those in place, it's just a matter of like, well, we're going to be adding a few more channels to this, and we're going to be, we have a pod of client support here. Maybe we're going to add another pod. It becomes a lot more modular at that point.
Totally. I love you brought that up. I have 2 young kids, and so I like to think of things in terms of Legos and businesses in terms of Legos. And so the pod model is my favorite model. It doesn't work for every agency, but whenever I can, I like to think about things in terms of like small little building blocks. For example, with Mattermade, I knew that a 4-person pod could generate $500K in profit when at capacity. And capacity I defined as 90% of actual full utilization. And so that way you're like, okay, if I want to make 1.5 in profit, I need 3 pods. That's very simple. And really all you need to do is nail operations for 1 pod. And then you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. And then my general rule is anytime the team triples in size, I expect that something is going to break. And sometimes it's just one thing. Sometimes it's all of your systems and processes start to fall apart. And going back to the Lego analogy, it kind of makes sense. Like if you have, you start adding and adding and adding, eventually this thing's going to start bending and get weak and heavy, and you need to stack on some supporting pieces. And in a business world, that'd be like layers of management, or new processes or new automation, whatever it is. So yeah, I think you can keep the concept of the business can stay very simple if you use a pod model, for sure.
I like that you brought that up too, because I think there's a misconception that happens with agencies that like once they just optimize their systems, then everything is just going to be fine. But the reality is that you're laughing, but like I hear this though, because they're like, okay, well, I want to grow the company, but I need to go and put all these systems in place. A year later, I hear the exact same thing from them, and then just simply not moving forward on this. And really, what it comes down to is like, all right, you know what? Generating growth in your company it's going to break your systems. And if your systems are so tightly dialed in, then what's going on is you're basically fading into oblivion because you're not actually growing and stressing these systems in a way where it's what you should be expecting as you're growing the company. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, absolutely. I find these natural breakpoint for me personally across the two agencies that I own that have gone into higher headcounts. I've found breakpoints like when you're one person to maybe 5 to 7 people, you're basically still just like able to wrap your arms around everything. It's very simple. You don't really need to think about systems or processes too much. Then like around the 7 to 15 range, you start to find, okay, we feel like we're a business now. We're going to actually have some structure. Around 15 is that first big break point I've found across my agencies where like, okay, crap. Now I need to have like reviews and, QBRs and all these things. And then again at 30 break point. And then again at 45 break point. So I'm sure it's different for every agency, but that's what I've seen personally.
Yeah, I think that those are, I've seen similar things with that as well. And one really difficult challenge on this that I've seen is around, the 7 to 15 place where, yes, they need all these systems, but they're also, it's at a point where they've invested the most in the company. So their payroll is the highest it's ever been. And there's a lot of stress on the CEO, and they oftentimes don't have a manager in place, or a lot of times what we see is that like they have a manager or like a chief of staff, but really what they're doing is they're more like in client support, and maybe like 10% of their time is on management type of structure. So essentially what's happening is no one's doing the work that needs to happen in order to actually run and grow the company. So then you have all these pieces that are just falling apart in the company due to just really no management here. And then the CEO is wondering, why am I so stuck in this? Well, the reason why is because you're doing all the work. You should not be the one building all those systems. That needs to be a manager that's actually building out the structures for, your growth planning. And, you mentioned about the profit modeling and you actually building a plan that's going to execute that. And I don't see very many CEOs that are disciplined enough on their own to be able to actually manage to that level of cadence and build all the systems and processes and manage the team and probably do the sales too, because they're doing that, and maybe even do the client strategy because they're probably involved in there too. So you can see this is where I see a huge breakdown in that size of the company.
Totally. One of the big benefits to starting with a profit model, the way that I do this for myself is I'll break down the business growth into 3 distinct phases. And it could be however many phases you want, but I like to keep it simple. The first phase I call proof of concept phase. And in that phase, I will describe what does the service delivery team look like? How much are they making? And how many clients can they support? And at that stage, it's a hypothesis, right? You don't know these things yet as facts, but it's a best guess. And then importantly, I create a section for all of my anticipated, essentially a budget. Like, here's how much we're going to spend on cold email and ads and whatever else we anticipate, software, insurance. Then there's a second phase where we start to invest more heavily. Like, okay, if we can get through proof of concept phase, and let's just make up numbers, it takes us to 15 clients. Okay, when we get to 15 clients, we probably need to start investing in some of these management layers or maybe more senior staff, whatever it is. Maybe we want to start pushing on growth harder. So we need to double or triple our budget around ads and marketing. And when you look at how that impacts the model, you can start to play around with like, okay, the proof of concept phase gets me to 30K a month in profit. But then when we jump into that next phase of growth, all of a sudden our expenses are going up and our profit drops from 30 back down to 15 because we're making a bunch of new investments. And so while it doesn't happen in the literal sense where you suddenly go overnight from 30 back down to 15, it's super important to be aware of that, because that, I think, ties into the heart of what you were just describing, where most owners and CEOs, when they come to that breaking point of around 15 employees, and they have to make that choice of, do I incur a bunch of new expenses that I'm not really feeling comfortable with, which is going to take my personal income way down in order to grow the business? Or do I kind of shy away from that and just kind of bounce up against this upper limit without ever growing? And I think it's helpful to see that before you get there, so that when you get there, you're like, oh, this is that moment where I'm going to be okay with going from 30 to 15 in take home per month in order to get to 50 per month. And
Right.
it's a trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been there myself too. And I think it takes a real mindset shift on this, because what I see a lot of times happen at that stage, you in your explanation, you were saying they go from 30,000 down to $15,000 of net. And I find there's a real scarcity mindset that happens at that point. And where they're just like, well, it's good enough. Everything's fine. Everything's fine until there's like someone quits, or until like they lose a big client, and then another one, and then another one. And now they're in like a really bad situation to try to go and fix that. And, you were mentioning with this budget of like setting aside money for cold email and for ads, or for whatever it is to actually generate growth in the company. But one of the things that I'm finding is that these companies, like, first of all, a lot of companies, they will go and they'll try to invest in those things, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because they don't have those things in place, that, like you were mentioning about how, you had all these great outcomes and case studies, and your company was positioned in a way where you could drive ads, and it would actually, they would be able to they could convert. But the way most agencies are actually positioning their companies, I know because I've had thousands and thousands of conversations with agency owners, and the majority of them are positioned as service providers, not results providers. And they all look the same. They think they're all different. It's a different coat of paint in most cases. Even if they do really exceptional work, It's not positioned that way. So what ends up happening is that they're having these pricing wars. They're being those guys that you are competing against, who are, a third of the price point, and they still don't win the deal, right? And unless you've actually done the positioning, you are in such a situation where it's pretty difficult to be able to drive real predictable traffic to your company, to be able to generate sales consistently, because you're basically relying on referrals. And not that referrals are bad, like you started your company with those connections and the referrals,
Sure.
right? But you need a foundation to build on top of that, and having that, being able to command those prices, that's what allows you to be able to get past those hard times where you can actually invest in what you need to get to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you don't want to be, it's like you end up with your back against the wall pretty quickly if you are positioning yourself as a commodity.
Well, and I think but what would you say to those companies that don't realize they're positioning themselves as a commodity?
I think it depends on what you want. And I'd imagine this is a lot of the work, or part of the work, that you help your clients with, Mandy, where, there's so many different ways to have success in business or find success in business. And there are many different definitions of successful. I think it's a very personal thing. And, if you want to just be in this like slugfest with competitors and kind of fighting for scraps, and that's fine, then a commodity offering is fine. There's no reason to change that. But I assume most people hear that and like, well, I don't want that. And in that case, then sure, you need to have a strategy in place to not be positioned as a commodity. so that you can command higher prices, so that you can create the margins that you want, so that you can hire more senior staff so you're not dealing with as much bullshit, so that you can have a more relaxing lifestyle with a business that starts to run itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really comes down to choosing your hard. Like,
Yeah.
you know, is it hard to invest ahead of growth? Yeah. But it's also really hard to be stuck in this level where you can't get the company further, but it's also like running your life, and you don't really have a company that's worth very much because you're at the center of it. That's pretty
Yeah.
hard. I think I would argue that that's a lot harder than doing the work of like becoming a really exceptional company so that you don't have to go and fight for the scraps.
Yeah, and I've been in both positions myself, and I can use this as an example. My current agency, Profit Labs, where we help other agencies with finance strategically. There's an upper limit there that doesn't exist so much in a growth oriented field like marketing or sales. If you're helping businesses with marketing or sales, the upside for them is almost limitless, and so you can have value-based pricing that goes to the moon like we did with Mattermade. Whereas with an offering like Profit Labs, our ticket price starts at $27.50 per month, and goes up to a max of maybe $5,000 per month.
Yeah.
The reason I'm bringing this up is it is just as hard for me to close deals at $2,750 per month as it was to close deals at $45,000 per month. Like it's still hard, right? Everything is always going to be hard. To your point, choose your hard. So I think it's important to know that. I think people assume that if you move up in pricing, suddenly it's going to be that much harder, and it really isn't. It's just going to be different.
Yeah. And that's an interesting perspective that you share, and I love that you were vulnerable and actually just sharing that too. And I'm curious too. What made you, if you don't mind me asking, what made you go and choose to go for a lower price point versus what you've done? And maybe it's because just diversification, because you're already doing it in other companies.
Yeah, it's definitely a diversification play. I still own Mattermade, and it still has higher ticket. I think our average ticket there is around 15 to 17K per month. I have No Boring Design, the design agency. Our average ticket there is 6,500 per month. And then this new one where our ASP is around 3,500 per month. The reason for that, beyond just diversification, is I liked the other attributes of the business, right? Mm-hmm. Finance is super, whereas marketing and sales can be very, the market turns. What's the first budget that gets cut? Marketing, design, right? And so while I could command a higher price point there, it was a lot more volatile and a lot less sticky. Whereas with finance, once you choose a financial partner, they're in all of your systems with all the logins. It's very, very painful to migrate to a new provider, which makes it, the downside of that is it's really hard to close new business because people don't want to be in the market to switch vendors. That's like a bad thing if they're in the market. But when they do, you kind of get them for life until you fuck it up, right? These are 3, 4, 5 year engagements as opposed to 6 months, and then a new leader comes in and they bring in their new favorite firm.
I've stayed with financial, with accountants who I absolutely hated. Like my last accountant in California, he was such, I won't say any words on this, but he was like a chauvinistic guy that I'd be sitting there with my husband and he would go and I'd ask a question and he would respond back to my husband. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm the one, I'm like, I have a company here. I know it was just, yeah. And I stayed with him for years because, well, he saved us a good amount on our taxes. He was effective in some ways, but it was just really painful to move. And it took me to actually just until we moved into a different state where I'm like, well, we're starting fresh on everything. So why not get a new accountant? And you can even have bad people they're staying with. So for you, and it sounds like you have to have that much more of a compelling offer for them to move.
Yeah, totally.
But the advantage is if they stay forever. That's a good advantage.
Yeah.
So Eli, where can people find out more about you, about Profit Labs or your other companies?
Sure. If they're interested in learning about Profit Labs, just profit-labs.co. You can reach out there and book a meeting. If you want to connect with me, I talk about all things agency profitability, how to increase margins and grow responsibly. Find me on LinkedIn, Eli Rubel. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, it's nice to have you. And for those who are listening, if you'd like to learn how to be able to drive a higher fee like Eli has done to be able to generate generate millions of dollars of net profit, you can go to handsoffceo.com/briefing and join one of our live briefings where you get coaching directly from me on how to be able to charge higher price points by delivering bigger outcomes and how to be able to position that so that you can really be the authority in your market. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.